The morning Victor Crane made the worst mistake of his life. He was wearing a freshly pressed suit and a smile that had never once been earned. Julian had worked the early shift at the Grand Soleil Hotel for 3 years. 3 years of 5 a.m. alarms, stiff uniforms, and corridors that smelled of expensive flowers and other people's lives. She knew every creak in the service elevator, every temperamental hinge on the linen cart, every colleague who needed a quiet word of encouragement before their shift found its rhythm. She was not invisible. She simply existed in the part of the hotel that guests looked through rather than at. That morning, she was humming. Low and absent-minded, the kind of sound that escapes a person when they are genuinely at peace. Her phone had buzzed at 4:47 am, Jinho, before her alarm even went off. Eat something before your shift. Not just coffee. I mean it. She had laughed in the dark of her apartment and typed back a single eye-roll emoji. He had responded with a photo of the breakfast he was already making for himself, as if to demonstrate proper behavior. She had shaken her head and smiled the whole way to work. That was the Julian who walked into the Grand Soleil that Tuesday. Grounded. Unaware that by the time her shift ended, the life she had carefully, painstakingly built would be sitting in pieces around her feet. She was restocking the third-floor linen cart when her supervisor appeared at the end of the corridor, avoiding eye contact in a way that immediately unsettled her stomach. "Mr. Crane wants to see you." His office. Now. Did he say why? The supervisor was already walking away. Performance review. Just go, Julian. Victor Crane's office was on the executive floor, a level most of the housekeeping staff had never set foot on. Julian knocked twice and pushed the door open. Crane was standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out over the city like a man who had decided it belonged to him. "Close the door," he said without turning around. She closed it. "Sit down, Julian." She sat. Something in the room felt wrong. The kind of wrongness that has no name yet, that lives in the body before the mind catches up. The chair across from his desk felt too far from the door. Crane turned around slowly. He looked at her the way certain men look at things they believe they have the right to take. "You've been here 3 years, he said. "Yes, sir." "Good worker. Punctual. Staff like you." He walked toward his desk, sat on the edge of it rather than behind it, closer to her than a desk should allow. "I've been watching your file. I think there's room to move you up. Better hours, better pay, maybe a path to permanent residency sponsorship." Julian felt the words land with a kind of precision that told her they had been arranged in advance. Thank you, sir. I'd appreciate any opportunity. I do things for people who do things for me, Crane said. Simply. Like it was policy. The room went very quiet. "I'm not sure I understand," Julian said, though she understood completely. He reached out and put his hand on her arm. She stood up immediately. "Don't." "Julian." "I said don't." Her voice was controlled, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. "I'm going to leave now." He moved between her and the door. Not loudly, not dramatically, just repositioned himself in the way men do when they want a woman to understand that the exit is negotiable. What happened next lasted less than 2 minutes. He grabbed her arm. She twisted free, clawed at his face with enough force to leave 4 distinct marks across his left cheek, shoved him backward into his own desk with both hands, and walked out of the office while he was still recovering his balance. She did not run. She walked. Neither of them had noticed the small black camera mounted in the upper corner of the room, its tiny red light blinking with quiet, indifferent patience. Julian's hands were steady when she knocked on the HR office door. She had decided on the walk down 3 flights of stairs that she would not shake, would not cry, would not give anyone in this building the satisfaction of seeing her come apart. She had also decided that she was going to say everything, clearly, with dates and details and the scratch marks on Victor Crane's face as her first exhibit. The HR manager, a soft-spoken woman named Deborah, listened with an expression that Julian would later describe as carefully neutral, the face of someone who already knows how the story ends and is bracing themselves to deliver the result. "I'll need you to put this in writing," Deborah said. "I want to do that. I want to do that today. We'll review it and—" "He has scratches on his face," Julian said. "From where I fought him off. If you look at him right now, this minute, you'll see them." Deborah wrote something on a notepad. She did not pick up her phone. She did not call anyone. She wrote something and said, "We take all reports very seriously, Julian. Give us time to look into this properly." What Deborah did not tell her, what Julian would only learn later, was that Victor Crane had called Deborah's extension from his private mobile phone exactly 6 minutes after Julian left his office. That the counter-report was filed before Julian even reached the HR floor. That the words theft, insubordination, and threatening behavior toward a senior manager were already typed, printed, and sitting in a folder with her name on it. They had done this before. The whole machine of it, practiced and efficient and invisible. Julian finished her shift because she did not know yet that it was her last one. She changed linens and restocked minibars and smiled at a child in the elevator who was wearing a tiara and holding a stuffed elephant. Normal things. Real things. She held on to them like handrails. At 4:15 p.m., her supervisor appeared again. "They need you downstairs. Conference room B." 2 people she had never seen before were seated at the table. A security officer stood near the door. The termination letter was already printed. Her name was already at the top. "This is a mistake," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Whatever he told you, it's a lie. I filed a report this morning." "The report is being reviewed," said the man across the table, in the tone of someone reciting a script. "In the meantime, given the severity of the allegations against you, we can't have you on the floor." What allegations? But she could see the shape of it now. The architecture of it. "He assaulted me and now I'm the one being walked out?" Nobody answered. They gave her 20 minutes to clear her locker. The security officer stood outside the door while she did it. She took the photo of Jinho, the unopened visa letter, a small bottle of lotion, and a paperback she'd been reading on breaks. She left the uniform folded neatly on the bench. She would not give them the satisfaction of her throwing it. In the corridor, on her way to the exit, she passed a young woman named Sophia who worked the rooms on the East Wing. Sophia looked at her, then looked quickly away. Then, as Julian passed, Sophia reached out and pressed her hand briefly, just once, just firm, and said very quietly without looking up, "He did the same to Maria 18 months ago." She signed something and disappeared. "Don't disappear, Julian." Julian gripped her bag strap and kept walking. Outside on the pavement, the city moved around her with complete indifference. Taxis, pigeons, a man arguing into a phone, a woman pushing a stroller with one hand and eating a sandwich with the other. Continuing. She sat on the low wall at the edge of the hotel's entrance, the side where the guests didn't sit, and called Jinho. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, you off already?" "I was thinking." "Jinho." Her voice cracked on the second syllable. Just slightly. That was enough. He went silent. She told him everything. The office. Crane's face. The HR meeting. Sophia's whisper. The conference room and the pre-printed letter with her name already at the top. She told him in the flat, factual way she had decided to use because she was afraid that if she let the emotion into her voice she would not be able to finish the sentence. When she was done, there was a pause. Not a confused pause. Not a panicked one. A very deliberate, very controlled pause that she had learned, in 2 years of loving Jinho, meant he was deciding something. "Where are you right now?" he asked. "Outside. On the wall by the service entrance." "Stay there. Don't move." "I'm coming." "Jinho, you don't have to." "Julian." His voice was quiet and absolute. "Stay there." He hung up. She stared at her phone. Then she looked up at the Grand Soleil's gleaming facade, all glass and marble and the illusion of grace, and felt something move through her that was not quite grief and not quite rage. Something older than both. Something that had been storing itself in her chest for the 3 years she had spent making other people's beds. She did not know yet what Jinho was about to do. She did not know about the security footage, or the buried files, or the other women. She did not know that the man she loved had spent the drive over making 7 phone calls in sequence, each one shorter and more precise than the last. What she knew was that she was sitting on a cold wall with a cardboard box of her belongings, and that somewhere inside that building, Victor Crane was at his desk or in a meeting or eating lunch, completely unworried. That, she thought, is the last peaceful afternoon he will ever have. She was right. She just didn't know it yet. If this story is hitting different, if you can feel Julian's weight and you want to see justice land, take 3 seconds right now. Hit like, hit subscribe, and let's get to 1,000 together. Every subscriber tells the algorithm this story matters. Now let's get back to it. Jin Ho Beck arrived without fanfare. No entourage, no dramatic entrance. He pulled up in a dark car, got out, and walked straight to where Julian was sitting. He looked at her first, all of her, the way you look at someone you love when you're checking to see if they're still intact, and then he sat beside her on the wall. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Not the way they'll be able to see," she said. He nodded slowly. Then he looked up at the building. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Okay," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Jin Ho, what does okay mean right now?" He turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was one she had only seen once before, the night someone had tried to cheat one of his business partners and Jin Ho had handled it so thoroughly and so quietly that the person simply never appeared in that world again. It was not anger. Anger was loud and wasteful. This was something still and surgical. "It means I own this hotel," he said, "and I'm going in." The executive floor of the Grand Soleil had never seen Jin Ho Beck walk through it with purpose. He had always been a background figure by design. A name on documents, a signature on policy, a presence in annual reports but rarely in hallways. He preferred it that way. Invisibility, he had learned, was its own kind of power. That afternoon, he made himself visible. He walked into the hotel with his legal counsel and a forensic IT specialist he had called from the car. He did not announce himself to the front desk. He did not need to. The moment the general manager's PA saw him step out of the elevator, she went the color of uncooked dough. "Mr. Beck, I didn't know you were." "I need access to the security operations room," he said, "and I need HR records for any complaint filed against Victor Crane in the last 5 years." Sir, Mr. Crane is in a meeting if you'd like me to." "I didn't ask about Mr. Crane." She picked up her phone with trembling hands. The security operations room smelled of stale coffee and old carpet. 2 junior technicians were on shift. They looked at Jin Ho, looked at the man behind him carrying a hard drive case, and made the very smart decision to step aside without being asked. "The footage from the general manager's office," Jin Ho said. "Today, between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. The technician pulled it up. Then he hesitated. "Sir, there's a deletion flag on this file. Someone requested the footage be wiped at." He checked the log, 9:23 a.m. "But it wasn't wiped," Jin Ho said, reading the screen himself. "No, sir. The system queues deletions for 48 hours in case of override. It's still here. Pull it." The footage played on a monitor in a room that had gone completely silent. Jin Ho watched it without expression. 1 minute and 48 seconds. Every second of it. When it ended, he said only, "Copy it to 3 separate drives. I want chain of custody documentation on all 3. He paused. "And I want every deletion request logged and preserved. Someone will want to explain that." Then he went to the HR records. He had expected bad. He was not prepared for how methodical it was. 3 prior complaints, 1 from 2021, 2 from 2022. Different women, different incidents, identical outcomes. An NDA, a financial settlement, a termination or transfer. Each file signed off by Deborah in HR. Each one stamped resolved. Each one buried under the architecture of plausible deniability. Jin Ho sat in the HR office for a long moment, the files spread in front of him. Deborah appeared in the doorway. She looked at the open files on her own desk and went very still. "How many people knew?" Jin Ho asked without looking up. "Mr. Beck, how many people in this building knew about these complaints and said nothing?" Deborah's silence was its own answer. "You are going to sit down," Jin Ho said quietly, "and you are going to give my lawyer the name of every person who touched these files. And then you are going to think very carefully about what cooperating with an investigation looks like versus what obstructing one looks like." He finally looked at her. "Because there is still time for you to be on the right side of this. But that window is closing." The board meeting was called for the following morning with 12 hours notice and no stated agenda. 7 members flew in or dialed in from wherever they were. Jin Ho let them settle, Let them exchange the usual pleasantries, let them wonder. Then he turned on the screen. He showed them the footage first. No preamble. No explanation. Just the timestamp, the room, and 1 minute and 48 seconds of what Victor Crane believed he had gotten away with. Nobody spoke. Then Jin-ho showed them the 3 prior complaints. The NDAs. The payments. The pattern, laid out in chronological order as if it were the most boring presentation in the world, which, in its methodical horror, it almost was. This has been happening in a hotel with my name on it, Jin-ho said. To women who trusted that their workplace had some basic obligation to protect them. The most recent victim is my fiancé. He paused, letting that land. Victor Crane used the power of his position and the institutional silence of this HR department to assault and silence multiple women, all of whom were immigrants, all of whom he specifically chose because he believed they had the least recourse. One board member, a woman in her 60s named Patricia, pressed her fingers to her mouth and looked away from the screen. I'm calling a vote, Jin-ho said. Immediate termination of Victor Crane. Full independent HR audit. Compensation review for all documented complainants. And I want a policy overhaul on assault reporting that removes HR discretion entirely and triggers automatic independent review. The vote took 4 minutes. It was unanimous. Security escorted Victor Crane from his office at 2:17 p.m. He had not been told why until he was in the corridor, and then it was Jin-ho's lawyer who told him, concisely, legally, without drama. Crane's face cycled through several expressions: confusion, indignation, then something that looked like the first flicker of genuine fear. He passed 3 housekeeping staff in the lobby on his way out. He had never learned their names. They watched him go. None of them looked away. The state prosecution moved quickly, given the quality of the evidence. Julian gave her formal statement in a room with a victim's advocate and a recorder and no cameras. Jin-ho sat in a chair in the hallway outside. She had asked him to wait there, and he had understood completely this was hers to carry into that room, not his. When she came out 45 minutes later, she looked exhausted in the specific way of someone who has just put something down that they've been holding for a very long time. He stood up. She walked straight into him and pressed her forehead against his shoulder, and he held her and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying. What neither of them knew yet was that Jin-ho's lawyer had already reached out, quietly, gently, with absolutely no pressure, to the 3 women named in the buried HR files. Within a week, 2 of them had called back. Within 2 weeks, 3 more women came forward on their own, having heard through their networks that someone was finally taking this to court. 6 women in total. A housekeeper who had transferred to a different property after signing an NDA she hadn't fully understood. A front desk supervisor who had left the industry entirely and was now working at a pharmacy because she couldn't bring herself to stand behind another hotel reception. A catering intern, 22 years old when it happened, who had simply gone home to her family and told no one. All immigrants. All targeted. All silent for different reasons. Shame, legal confusion, financial dependency, fear of deportation. One by one, they chose not to be silent anymore. The trial ran for 9 days. It was not a spectacle. It was meticulous and difficult and real. Julian sat in the front row for all of it, not as a performance but because she had decided that Victor Crane would not get to do any of this in a room where she was absent. She would be present. She would be looked at if he chose to look. She would not disappear. On the 5th day, a woman named Grace, the front desk supervisor who had left the industry, took the stand. She was composed until the defense attorney suggested she had misunderstood Crane's intentions, and then something shifted in her face, and she looked directly at the jury and said, "I understood exactly what he intended. That's why I left." The courtroom was very quiet after that. Crane's defense was what it always was in cases like this. Inconsistency, motive, she was disgruntled, she wanted money, it was a misunderstanding between 2 adults. The footage made that defense almost comically inadequate, but they tried anyway, because there was nothing else to try. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on 4 counts. When the judge read it, Julian did not cheer or cry or collapse. She breathed out. One long, slow exhale, like she had been half inhaling since the morning she sat on that wall outside the service entrance. Jin-ho's hand was on hers. She turned it over and held it properly. Across the gallery, the 6 women looked at each other. Grace caught Julian's eye and gave the smallest nod. Julian nodded back. Victor Crane stared at the table. The camera did not stay on him. He had already taken enough space in this story. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning that smelled of rain and fresh paint, the Julian Center for Workplace Dignity opened its doors for the first time. It was not a grand building. It was a converted ground floor space with good lighting and plants on every windowsill and a small waiting area with comfortable chairs and a bowl of wrapped sweets on the reception desk, because Julian had insisted that the first thing a person saw when they walked in should not feel clinical. She had been in too many clinical rooms. The center offered free legal aid for workers facing wrongful termination or harassment claims, trauma counseling with practitioners who specialized in workplace assault, evidence documentation support, because Julian had learned firsthand how quickly evidence disappeared when institutions controlled the systems, and rights education, specifically tailored for immigrant workers navigating industries that depended on their labor and banked on their silence. Grace was there on opening day. She had left the pharmacy and was now training as a legal advocate. She stood near the door in a blazer she'd bought for the occasion, greeting people with the particular warmth of someone who knows exactly what it costs to walk through a door like this. Jean Ho stood near the back, out of the way, watching Julian move through the space. She was explaining the counseling intake process to a volunteer, gesturing at a wall where they were going to put a mural. Her hands were animated. Her face was alive. He thought about the woman on the wall outside the service entrance, 6 months ago. Cardboard box at her feet. Voice cracking on his name. He thought, look at where she took it. The wedding was 3 weeks later, intimate. 60 people who meant something. Julian wore Kent cloth worked into the bodice of her dress, gold and green and the deep red her mother loved. Jean Ho's family had sent hanbok fabric from Seoul, and the ceremony space was draped in both. The colors impossible together on paper, somehow perfect in person. Jean Ho's mother performed the Paybik blessing with her hands shaking from emotion rather than age. Julian's aunt played something on a small drum that made half the guests cry before the vows even started. When Julian came down the makeshift aisle, a path of flower petals her nieces had dropped with tremendous seriousness, Jean Ho saw her and his composure lasted approximately 4 seconds. He cried. Quietly but visibly. Julian looked at him and laughed, the full, unguarded kind. Already, she whispered when she reached him. You're wearing the Kent, he said, like that explained everything. Because to him it did. The vows were short and honest. They had agreed not to perform. They had spent enough of the last 6 months in rooms where performance was required. This was just truth. I see you. I choose you. I will not let you stand alone. In the front row, Grace sat beside 2 of the other women from the trial. They had come separately and found each other and ended up side by side, which felt correct. During the vows, one of them reached over and took Grace's hand without a word. Grace looked straight ahead and held on. The morning after the wedding, Julian went to the center. Jean Ho had not asked why. He understood that some people heal by building, and Julian was one of them. She was reviewing the intake files when a staff member appeared at her office door. There's someone in reception, the staff member said quietly. She came in alone. She looks like she's been deciding whether to come in for a while. Julian stood up. What's her name? She wouldn't say yet. Julian nodded. Tell her there's no rush. Get her some water. I'll be right out. She took a breath, straightened her jacket, and walked toward the door. Because here is what Victor Crane never understood, what men like him never understand. He chose Julian because he believed she had nothing. No status. No power. No one who would move the world for her. He looked at her and saw a woman whose silence could be purchased with a visa sponsorship or threatened with a termination letter. He did not see what was actually there. A woman who had spent 3 years learning the architecture of a place that underestimated her. A woman whose love was returned by someone who understood that protecting a person means following their lead, not taking their story from them. A woman who, when the machinery of institutional silence turned against her, did not break, she mapped it. And then she dismantled it. And then she built something in its place. His silence was a weapon. Hers was a room she had been quietly filling. He emptied it one Tuesday morning and had no idea what walked out of his office. If you stayed until the end, thank you. This story exists because of people like you. If it moved you, if it made you feel something, please like this video, leave a comment telling us what hit hardest, and subscribe if you haven't already. We are on our way to 1,000 subscribers and every single one of you gets us there. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. We'll see you in the next one.